I'll call to order a regular meeting of City Council. I want to begin with a wishing of a happy end of Ramadan and a happy Eid Mubarak. Eid al-Fitr is this week, these 3 days, and so to our Muslim community, Eid Mubarak. Today is also the anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations. Yeah. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. First item of business this evening is the minutes of the regular council meeting held on Monday, June 19th. Recommendation to approve.
Moved
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, seconded by Councillor Marsden. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 2 is the minutes of the Economic Development Advisory Committee meeting of Wednesday, May 24th. Recommendation to receive.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor Asmussen. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item of business arising out of that committee's meeting pertains to the discussion around creating an environment for tech and entrepreneurship. The committee's recommendation to council is that council direct staff to review the current utilization and density of industrial zones in order to encourage a more diverse use of this zone, including high-tech office use.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor Asmussen. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. I think the general direction of this, but I'm wondering how a review is also an encouragement at the same time. So I'm just a little troubled by the wording here. So if we are directing them to develop a new policy of some sort in order to encourage, then that's what we should be doing. But then that carries with it a discussion of some sort about whether or not we should be piling more work onto our planning department like that, because this essentially, I think, would carry that message, directing them to do this. Or if we're asking them to review and then to report back on changes that might be needed to the bylaw in order to, or to bylaws or policies to encourage this sort of stuff, then we should say that. But at this stage, I'm not actually sure exactly what the intention of the committee was. Was it a review to find possible things to bring back to council to consider, or is it a review, or is it actually a direction to do something to encourage? So I'd be more inclined to support the former than the latter. The latter is, I think, what. Anyway, I got concerns with the wording.
I recognize that reviewing the current utilization and density of industrial zones goes nowhere toward encouraging.
That's right. So
it goes towards supporting a more diverse use of this zone or something like that.
I don't know.
But I was going to raise it, but I didn't want to be pedantic.
This is not pedantic,
I know.
pedantic at all. This is absolutely crucial to what we ask our staff to do, because I think the way it's written right now, it can be confusing.
I will ask that Councillor Marsden's microphone be activated so that the chair could offer some, perhaps, insight into the wording.
Thank you. And the discussion around the table had to do with the amalgamation of industrial zones that we've recently undergone, and the impacts that could possibly have on a wider, more diverse usage of specifically mezzanine space within a lot of these buildings. There had been some discussion around the table related to perhaps uses that weren't welcome in areas that were somewhat warehouse related, and one of the examples was an engineering company looking to rent space on the second floor of something that has industrial warehouse use on the bottom, and they put in warehouse space or a mezzanine with some offices. And for some reason, the zoning didn't allow an engineering company. I know our manager of economic development had some discussion recently and been doing a lot of work trying to fit a company that's just recently located to Coquitlam. It's got about 70 employees and is trying to make everything fit in terms from a zoning perspective. So one of the representatives on the committee has a significant experience with leasing of industrial lands, and he'd indicated that some other municipalities perhaps were more open to diverse uses of the space. And so the dialogue was, is there a way in which staff can take a look at some of this, get a bit more information? And with the concept of the encouraging is because we're looking, saying, you know what, we want to find those spaces and encourage the opportunities for business to be here. And if that means the utilization of some of this mezzanine space in our industrials as opportunities, then that's something they really want to encourage. He cited a couple of examples in neighboring communities, and we just wanted to give staff that direction to look at it. And the manager of economic development had indicated he felt it was a fairly quick process that could be incorporated within the work that he's undertaking already this year. It wasn't a significant workload that they'd be adding to it.
So based on that explanation, I'd suggest an amendment then, and then after the words "in order to," I would add "identify ways to encourage." So they will identify the ways, and we cut through that to report back to council, but they won't. I think that's what they're asking for, to identify the ways to encourage.
I think that would certainly fit within the tone of what they were trying to achieve, yes.
So are you seconding?
I would absolutely second that motion.
Thank you.
On the amendment to add identify ways, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Anything else, Councillor O'Neill?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Councillor Towner?
Good initiative.
Thank you. And when I read this, what I came up with was a question along the lines of, my understanding of the regional growth strategy, it has higher density office space near SkyTrain and aims to conserve industrial zones across the region for industrial uses. And I know that our definition of industry is changing, but I'm just wondering if this recommendation is in keeping with the notion of keeping office space near rapid transit and if there's any concerns there.
Mr. McIntyre, any regional growth strategy kinds of issues?
Your Worship, no. Just a quick response to that. No, we've got employment generating targets and commitments. There's industrial areas that we're committed to as well, but no. I can speak to this if council wishes. The economic development manager came in and talked with me about this motion coming from the committee. And if there is support at council to do this review, it can be done. I think it was mentioned that the industrial zones were reviewed. We went through quite a process not that long ago where the 9 zones were consolidated down to 3. Quite a bit of that exercise focused on the whole question of office space, like what type of office space, how much office space. And in that, there was a lightening up, or it was a easing up, more flexibility in terms of office space, office users being permitted in the industrial zones. But that was done sort of in balance, that you want to be careful that you don't throw wide open any office anywhere, because then we'll have continued greater challenges attracting office users to, like, the city center and the transit corridor area. So you have to be kind of mindful of that, of the balance. My offer would be, we are working on some work right now, sort of the preliminary stage to the commercial zone review. It's on our work program, and also sort of a background piece to the city center area plan. We're looking at office, doing a little bit of an office study right now. We've got a consultant assisting us with that. So if council wants to go ahead with this motion, more focused around office, I would take it, than reviewing all the uses in industrial zones. But it's focused on office, and I think the component of the mezzanine area and making better utilization of that. We could probably add that on to this office space study we're doing right now as part of commercial zone review, and just add to that assignment to look at this in comparison to some of the municipalities, particularly around permitting office use in mezzanine space.
Thank you. That's a good information and a good refresher for me. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Zwilla.
So first of all, I like it when committees are engaged. So it's very good that we're getting good stuff out of this committee. I had the same notes in my book here that Councillor Towner just expressed. It reminds me when I used to work in the field as a sales rep, they always used to say, sell what you have. There would be sales reps that would come back and say, well, I need this and I need that. And there would be all kinds of inventory in the warehouse, and they would say, sell what you have. And I really think that we have SkyTrain, and that we should be looking at, to what Mr. McIntyre just said, office space around the SkyTrain. And I know we do have the TUP process. We have approved some TUPs for offices that wanted to do things outside of the zone. And I just don't feel like we have the luxury in the city right now to start relooking at zoning that we just looked at in 2015. It hasn't even been 2 years, and that was a comprehensive program. So I like what Mr. McIntyre is saying about office use. I think we should focus on transit, and I think this pushes us off track. So I'm not going to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you, as Vice Chair. We had a good conversation. This strictly was just on office. And what it was looking at, some of the densities where we're having some new office built down in Fraser Mills, being your standard tilt-up office, warehousing, stuff like that. Warehousing changing. We're not having the same big products all stored in a warehouse. You're getting a lot less products into warehouses now. And we're also looking at not all office types, but what more office types, because a lot of businesses now are not our stats used to be 20% or 10% office, 90% warehousing. What we're looking at is those ratios and better allowing a little more offices and industrial type things in those areas, and actually hopefully a mezzanine area or a second floor offices in these buildings to create more density of those types of combined uses in those areas. And what we're asking for is a review of what other cities are doing within their business parks or industrial areas. They're getting higher densities in there. Where are we at with our regulations? Are we matching that? Are we falling behind? We're not looking at pulling away from a lot of the things that we think should be in the town center or in where we want to get offices, but we want to take a broader look at what's going around the region, in our business parks. Some other areas are getting that second floor adjournment with office and complementary businesses within those areas. So that's what the whole review really is about, is trying to take, because we also in Coquitlam have a very limited industrial or land use base. And the talk was also about how do we better maximize that type of land and its use in those areas within those things. So that was the gist of it. I think that's what we're really asking strictly on the office, scanning the area of the other municipalities around. What are their, so if we're attracting businesses, we want to be on an equal playing field with what's going on in other areas around the region. Thank you.
And so from I'll put on my hat as chair of regional planning. We've been working hard to try to make sure that we retain industrial uses for industrial purposes, because we have lost a lot of industrial land to higher uses, and certainly in Vancouver and Burnaby, for example, they lost a lot of industrial land. In Richmond, we built lots of office parks and called it industrial, but it was really just large parking lots with a 3-story office building in the middle. And I think that by and large what we have to do as a society is be more mindful of where we put office density and where we put industrial uses being certainly an ongoing need in the region. So I appreciate the concerns expressed by 2 members of council that while I think I know where they're trying to go here. In the end, a more diverse use of the industrial zone could be the way to phrase something that actually is the opposite of what the regional growth strategy is intended to achieve. We once had a local business that was in the marketing side. It was just entirely an office use. And they bought a warehouse in a neighboring community and converted it to office. It was on an industrial corridor, nowhere near transit. So if you needed to get to it, you had to drive. And it really surprised a bunch of us because we watched as it became really high-end office space from warehouse space. And I think we have to be really careful that that's not where we're heading, that in fact that to the extent that we need office components within industrial areas in order to support industrial applications, that's one thing. But I'll support the recommendation as amended, but I'm still hesitant related to the way in which we move forward on our industrial zones. We don't have much left that's industrial in Coquitlam, or in the region for that matter, and I think that we should be very careful. Councillor Marsden will rebut, perhaps.
No, I appreciate the fact you'll support it. I just wanted to set people's minds at ease that there is no discussion that happened around that table that would indicate a reduction in industrial land or industrial uses. It really focused on maximizing it. And again, looking for the mezzanine space that many have put in and say, how do we utilize that for those companies that perhaps are stepping up, or some of the tech companies maybe that they needed to do some R&D downstairs. They need some space for that, but they need office as well. And there might be some ancillary businesses that they could partner up with that we need to welcome them into that space where they could work together. So it's really just looking at trying to move things forward. It's certainly, there's no dialogue whatsoever around reducing industrial lands, because I agree. We have a dearth of industrial lands, and we are challenged to make sure that we maintain them. So this is, again, augmenting the businesses that are in the area, find those ancillary businesses that can help them out, and then move us forward. Thanks.
And dearth is one of those words we should try to use every council member. Yeah. No. That's good. No. Okay. The motion is the committee recommendation as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Cirillo was opposed. The motion carries.
Item 3 pertains to zoning amendment bylaw number 4764. It's a text amendment to revise parking requirements for ground-oriented multifamily housing and secondary suites and single-family housing. Staff recommendations that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4764.
Moved.
Moved by Councillor Asmunsen. The motion almost fails. Seconded by Councillor Cirillo. Councillor Hodge.
Okay, thank you. We've heard about parking issues throughout the city, and especially as we deal with growth, and this is sort of all parts of the city. But one of the reasons that there seems to be a shortage of parking in certain areas of the city for sure is that people are not using the existing spaces on their property for parking. So we have a lot of spillover into the streets for parking. And one of the biggest challenges we have, and that we've heard through this whole process, is the city doesn't have the ability to force people to use their garages for parking, or to ensure that they make their tenants park on their property, if in the case of secondary suites. And so, currently homeowners do have to provide that third parking spot on property if they have a tenant. And I'm concerned that adding more parking spaces on property, on single-family property, isn't going to, encourage people to use it. It's there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a homeowner is going to say the tenant has to park on my property. I think they may still continue to say we don't want you parking on the property, whether there's spaces there or not. Certain areas such as up on Burke Mountain, where there's a lot of young families buying homes and they're putting in secondary suites, the problem is worse there, but it's only in certain areas. And the areas that are really hardest hit are the early neighborhoods that were built there, back where we only have parking on one side of the street. And it's sort of ironic that previous councils who designed the parking up there and were planning a transit-oriented community made the streets narrow because they didn't want a lot of paved surface. They wanted permeable soil. I think they made the right decisions based on the information they had. And now we're talking about, so we reversed that and we put parking on both sides of the street. And now we're talking about paving the front yards to create more parking. And I'm just afraid that's going to really have a negative impact on the look of the street. It's going to have less permeable soil. And so I have a real problem supporting that part of the bylaw. I think one of the areas up there that, in a lot of our communities, a lot of areas of our community, is we see parking issues near multifamily developments where there's not enough parking within the development. And I think that part of this bylaw I can support, and it may in fact alleviate the other problems. So I don't know sort of how to proceed here because the way the bylaw is written, that I'd like to support the part around multifamily and certainly not allowing certainly increasing the 2 parking spots in multifamily, only allowing 33% of them to be in tandem. But I have real concerns about the single family, and I don't want to support that part. So is this a case where we can do separation? It's not really written that way, the way the bylaw is presented. The background piece works really nice because they're listed 1, 2, 3, and I can go, I'll support 1, I'll support 2, but that's not what we're doing here. We're actually working on amendments to a bylaw.
Yeah, the background was more designed for a straw poll function. We never cherry pick those. Call a short recess.
Anything snack. Okay, guys, I already finished off the cakes. You know.
We'll reconvene. The suggestion was made that we find a way to separate. The only place to separate would be in the bylaw. We never do that. We never cherry pick bylaw components because of the inherent risks associated with it. And as a result, I would suggest that we entertain a motion to refer back to staff in a minute. refer it back to staff. I won't call a vote on that until we've gone through the speakers list, if in fact that motion gets made. We've gone through the speakers list and that staff are quite comfortable with the straw poll kinds of elements of, what it is that council wants to see happen, or if there are specific components that council agrees they don't support, or specific components that they do support. And so we'll get that information in the hands of staff. One of the opportunities is to, first of all, defer it so that we can have this discussion at a council meeting a week from now, or actually 2 weeks from now, and then refer it from that meeting, because it is late and we have other things to deal with tonight. I suspect we've got a half an hour of discussion on this item now. So it's up to council whether to refer or to defer and then refer.
Let's say defer.
I'm going to.
I would.
Mr. Gilbert.
I believe those are the two appropriate suggestions. I guess what I would note is July 10th is also a public hearing in which the Prking Creek Centre Neighbourhood Plan comes forward, and it may well indeed be later in the evening as well. But it's true that what the appropriate thing is to refer back to staff to incorporate the changes, and it's just what degree of information and advice that council gives prior to that moment, and that could take place tonight or at a future meeting.
My preference is to refer back to staff if we have consensus that that's the direction that most staff want to, or most of the councillors want to go. That way, that allows staff to start to bring something forward. My understanding, if we defer, it just means all we're going to do is have the discussion in 2 weeks, whereas we refer back to staff means that they can work on an amendment.
If we refer it back to staff now, they will come back to us and say, what is it you want? Because we won't be able to, I mean,
Can we tell them right now what we want?
We can't. We can tell them in the next half an hour or 45 minutes. And that's the question, is whether we want to deal with that tonight or deal with it in 2 weeks and give staff their position, their marching orders.
Our position's going to change in 2 weeks.
It's not that it will change. It's simply that the last item on the agenda tonight will be at 3 a.m. if we take 45 minutes now and explain this to council. So what we could do is entertain the comments from any members who want to give them tonight, and then
make the decision to either refer or defer. Well, if anybody feels differently, let me see some.
Okay, Councillor Hodge, your any further comments?
Well, I was going to say, I think that we've made changes in particularly the area we hear about the most is Mount. We've made some changes, and the report that was done by Bunt Consulting suggested that in the areas where the changes have been made now, it seems to be working. Anecdotally, I agree, and I don't want to see us make changes. We can always do it in the future if it's not working, but I definitely think we need to address multifamily, and that's why I wanted to send this back to staff. So I'm done.
Okay, staff are taking that as, was there enough information there so that you're clear on Councillor Hodge's perspective? Okay, from his perspective. Okay, Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, my perspective is that this bylaw becomes much more attractive if it doesn't have the amendment that calls for an additional parking for eliminating tandem parking for secondary suites. If it doesn't have that, as we heard very loud and clear, that just is increasingly unworkable. So the bylaw, absent any of that and just dealing with the townhouse tandem, becomes more palatable. I'm not going to say exactly how I'll vote on that yet. I'm going to think some more through on that one, but certainly the secondary suite aspect. That's the big one. If we eliminate that.
But only on those specific front-loaded, narrower lots. You're not talking about allowing tandem parking in a secondary suite in a 60-foot lot.
That's what, yes, I guess so, yes.
So it's specific to the front-loaded, narrower, 40-footers. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I'll go to Councillor Marsden.
Thank you. The risk of having him think I'm going to agree with everything he says tonight, I think Councillor Hodge has hit the nail on the head with this. The challenge I have is with the single-family detached reference, and I was hoping that the recommendation, when we first saw it, would have broken it down so we could see what the recommendations are for multifamily, the townhouse, and then what the recommendations are for single-family. So I will certainly look to support dialogue with regards to the townhouse. But I do believe the information we've seen in the anecdotal, my observations when I go up there is that the changes that have been made in the single family are probably sufficient as is. So we don't need to go with the tandem right now or the widening of the lots.
Specifically on the narrower, front-loaded. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good. Councillor Rasmussen.
Well, I support the direction of the bylaw on both parts of it. I think we're being conflicted in our positions here between two types of housing. On one part, we are saying on a rear-loaded property with no driveway letdowns, which allows for more street parking on a street, that we require a parking pad for a rear-loaded for a third spot. But you're saying on a front-loaded piece of property that has less street parking due to driveway letdowns that you don't need a third parking spot, which seems very inconsistent or unfair to people that have a rear-loaded property, because part of their rear-loaded property or their backyard is being taken up by a parking pad. So it's very inconsistent in our approach to parking in the area. So if we believe that there's sufficient street parking, period, we should eliminate then the requirement for a suite parking extra spot, whether it's on a rear-loaded or front-loaded, because then we would be consistent with our application. By saying front-loaded doesn't have to do it and everything's hunky-dory, we're being extremely inconsistent and treating one different than the other. And I think the public decides to know that, are we being consistent one way or the other? And I think the bylaw, the way it's coming here, is to bring in some consistency into secondary suite parking. It has been an issue before this council, and I'm surprised some of the council members who have been on parking throughout the city as one of their biggest issues is now saying that parking isn't an issue here. Because this just isn't about Burke Mountain. You've heard tonight in a public hearing about different areas around the city that have parking problems in their areas. It's throughout the city. And so either you believe there's a problem, there's not a problem with the parking requirements in the city. I believe there is a problem with the parking. I do believe, though, that one of the options that's been mentioned before, and I think to deal with some of the enforcement issues, is to go to business licensing for secondary suites, because then we can deal with parking, we can deal with garbage, and we can deal with the other issue that was raised by Councillor Zerrill a number of times, is Airbnb. Under a business licensing, we can start enforcing those issues that the landowner has to give those spaces up for the tenant and be used for the tenant. The other issue is in most neighborhoods, street parking isn't designed for the residents to park their cars on. Street parking was always designed to have visitors come in. When you look at the Bunt report, you talk about almost an 80% of usage of the street parking during the week, and you have over 100% and plus on weekends when people come to visit, that there is no parking for visitors to come in there. So if you're happy with that, go ahead. But I support the bylaw the way it's written. I think there'll be separation. But I think if council wants, once again, to not be consistent in approach, and if parking on the streets are fine, then why would we have a requirement on any property? Just a couple of meetings back, we were some councillors who are ones in favor of this not going forward, was arguing about the width of the 2.6 meter parking stall on a rear loaded not being wide enough. So why would we be concerned about that? Secondly, it can't be for aesthetic reasons because we have a discussion about motorhomes, and we're saying the existing bylaw pointed out is that you can park 2 motorhomes on your front of your property, and that's allowed. So there can't be an issue about aesthetics. And the drawings we saw on the public hearing previously, all big Hummers, SUVs, and trucks. Not everybody in a tenant has a Hummer, an SUV, or a big pickup truck. So I don't think the difficulties can be, but my last point again is we're not being consistent if we don't make front-loaded treated the same as rear-loaded. Either we have a problem and we all treat them the same, or we don't have a problem. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a similar concern. Councillor Rasmussen's penultimate point was related to the images that Westfield showed, and staff analyzed those images subsequently at the request of council and determined that the vehicles weren't representative. Let's put it that way. They weren't representative of vehicles that would normally be parked in those spaces. That they weren't all Hummers, they weren't all SUVs, but even the compact cars were the size of SUVs. Because they've been placed there as a demonstration, and I think inadvertently made bigger than normal. I'll go with inadvertently, or perhaps enthusiastically. So whoever was doing the digital work, trying to make a point. That said, the yield on a 40-foot front loaded and a 33-foot rear loaded. I mean, they're not completely different because a rear loaded, you actually have to have a deeper lot, and you have to build a lane as well, and that takes up land. So I think it's important that we make sure that we have the right components for each of those 2 different styles of home. That we're not trying to subsidize one by relaxing components. And Councillor Rasmussen mentioned, for example, requiring only 2 parking spaces for a house that we would expect to have 3 cars, if it's front-loaded, and requiring essentially 5 parking spaces if it's rear-loaded, the 2 in the street and the 3 in the back. With a 40-foot front-loaded, you're going to be hard-pressed to put that 1 car even in between 2 houses. So every 2 houses will have 1 car of street parking, and it won't be for visitors. It'll be for one of the 2 tenants, and the other one will be parked somewhere else and yelling at us. And I'm still cognizant of the fact as well that a whole bunch of these families moving in are young families. And 10 years from now, the 6-year-olds will be 16. The 8-year-olds will have their own car. And I'm struggling with that. So I believe that staff have come up with a good set of suggestions related to a solution. I certainly no question that those people who want to develop front-loaded product in that space are going to be wanting to get a better yield. They don't have to deal with the issue that we're going to be dealing with in 10 years when that 8-year-old gets a car. And I think we owe it to those neighborhoods to either treat them the same or else get rid of the parking in the rear, the extra parking space in the rear for the rear-loaded stuff, because it doesn't make any sense. There's 5 spaces for a 33-foot lot and only 2 spaces or 2.5 spaces for a 40-foot lot, and only because we're not willing to make it a 42. So I'm going to be supporting the existing staff recommendations, but I suspect that council wants to figure out where to go there. And so it may well be that the work that staff comes back with includes an option of yes or no on the tandem on secondary suites in front-loaded narrow lot product. Councillor Zerl.
Thank you. I like the first 3 points. The only point that I I wasn't comfortable with was around the RS7 and the RS8. I think the idea that for a secondary suite that you need to have a house not obstruct a parking space for the principal dwelling is probably as prescriptive as we need to be. And I think that if that remains part of the bylaw, that will force owners to decide if they want a suite or they don't have the parking requirement to have a suite, and it might actually change the market a little bit, and it might actually start having smaller homes and maybe more affordable homes. So I'm totally fine with the first three bullets. I don't think we need to be prescriptive on RS7 or RS8. Then I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Asmundson's point about enforcement. I think that, and Mayor Stewart actually said this at one point, and I think it's a really good idea, and Councillor Asmundson just mentioned it, is a need to go to licensing for suites. And that's a way for us to be able to identify that the valid off-street parking is available before an okay is given for that. And I think if it was visible in the window, it would be wonderful for the neighbors to understand that there was a suite there, but also for fire and safety. So first three bullets I'm totally fine with. I don't want to go prescriptive on if it's a RS7 or an RS8. But I do want there to be an unobstructed parking spot, and then it's up to each and every owner if they have the space or not.
Okay, and sorry, the one component that Councillor Zerillo just reminded me of, and that is that it isn't up to every owner. If the owner has a 40-foot lot and wants a suite, it has to be an illegal suite, and it will probably get to be an illegal suite, and we will not have the fire safety provisions that would have been in place because they cannot go through the building department to get it, because they can't get the third parking space because of the 2 feet that we narrowed the lot up. And that's, I'm a proponent that we shouldn't make a structure that makes it necessary to be an illegal suite. If it's going to be a suite at all, it has to be illegal. Councillor Towner.
Thank you. I'll keep this very brief. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said. This is a tough one. We really want to make sure we get this right. So, and I'm struggling, but I keep talking to people and analyzing it and reading everything, and I really do think that there's buses up on Burke now, streets are wider, parking on both sides, we're paying more attention where we put the fire hydrants, we're just paying more attention to those elements. So the parking nightmares of the original neighborhoods up there are going to subside, maybe not in 10 years, but from what I'm hearing, younger people are doing more car-to-go and transit anyways. And so I'm torn with that. But it comes down to me, I don't want to do anything that's unintended consequences regarding anything that we've done to improve housing affordability. At the last meeting, a couple people here referenced these aren't affordable houses. Well, no, they're not affordable houses. But if we prescribe all the lots to be wider and the yield is less, and the price goes up like the UDI Institute said, or UDI said, then we have unintentionally made the price of housing more expensive, and I don't want to do anything that will affect that. But for me, the big one is enforcement. Although we can require parking to be built in any of our homes in Coquitlam, right now we have no way to enforce it. And people can use their garages for gyms and art studios and storage and park their own cars on the street. We have no way to enforce this. So people talk about visitor parking. Well, the residents are supposed to park in their garage, so why can't visitors park on their driveway and the tenant on the street? I don't know, I just think we have no way to enforce this, so I think it's taking a hammer to a bylaw. And although I'm comfortable as well with the multifamily bylaws, I'm leaning towards not what's written here for the RS7 and RS8. I don't know if that was as quick as I'd intended to be, but that's my thought. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so you're in favor 1, 2, 3, and not 4
Yes.
on the background. Got it. Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Clerk.
I was just going to put forward some suggested text for the referral motion.
No, I want one of us to come up with it.
I know.
What would you suggest?
Hoping that Mr. McIntyre and Mr. Fuji have received the input that they need, I would suggest that Council refer Bylaw 4764 back to staff to incorporate suggested amendments and direct staff to bring back a revised bylaw for Council consideration at a future meeting.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, second by Councillor Morrison. My question would be, would it be possible then to include, for example, the 40 to 42, the recommendation, or rather background number 4, as an alternate, like essentially either or, that we can choose to do it or not to do it, the widening of the RS8 lots. Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. We've got some pretty clear direction here tonight. What we'll do, we'll take the bylaw back and we'll show, I think maybe it's in a black line version to show what would come out if we've captured all the points that Council's looking for. And I think you're pointing to the background in the report of April 18th. It's sort of 4 main thrusts to this bylaw. So if Council's good with number 1, these sections stay in. You're good with number 2, these sections stay in. If we have a discussion and debate and vote at that time around number 3, depending on the outcome of the vote, that section either stays in or goes out, and the same with 4. So we'll be prepared next time to have it in a format, so there's kind of that pick choice.
So a severable format on 3 and 4.
Yes.
The tandem and the 2 feet. Okay. That's how they took the motion. Is any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, opposed, carried unanimously.
Item 4 pertains to zoning amendment bylaw number 4771 and zoning amendment bylaw number 4.
We'll lose someone first. Sorry, I meant someone will step out first. Oh, wait. Actually, you actually do have to declare why. We're in a different setting. Councillor Zarrillo will activate your microphone. There you go.
I'm just going to recuse myself from this decision as I'm working with an organization, or I'm on the board of an organization that the proponent is sponsoring an upcoming event. Thank you.
Now, Councillor Zarrillo recused herself earlier at a public hearing on the same item, and at the time she referred to it as some extra caution because she's not in a conflict, or I wouldn't perceive that to be a conflict in the technical sense, but rather the possibility of a perception of conflict. So, Mr. Clerk.
Item 4 pertains to zoning amendment bylaw number 4771 and zoning amendment bylaw number 4772. These are for the properties at 1311 Hachey Avenue and 325 Millview Street. Just note, staff mentioned during the public hearing portion that they needed to make an amendment, and this is located on attachment 2 of the public hearing brief, item 2. And that's just to change bylaw reference for a Schedule A. So I'd like to make that the first motion. The original bylaw Schedule A was mislabeled as 4722 when in fact it should be 4772. So that with that amendment, the council give second and third readings. In addition, council gives second and third readings to City of Coquitlam zoning text amendment bylaw number 4771, and second and third readings to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4772.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, second by Councillor Towner. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Thank you. I will just go and collect Councillor Zarrillo.
Clerk.
Thank you. Next item, item 5, pertains to zoning amendment bylaw number 4765 and the property at 912 Stewart Avenue. Staff recommendations that council give second and third readings to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4765.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, second by Councillor Wilson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 6 pertains to official community plan amendment bylaw number 4754 and zoning amendment bylaw number 4753. These are text amendment to the citywide official community plan bylaw number 3479, 2001, and City of Coquitlam zoning bylaw number 3000, 1996. Staff recommendations that council approve a revised Schedule C of Schedule A to City of Coquitlam official community plan amendment bylaw number 4754. Council gives second, third, and fourth and final readings to City of Coquitlam official community plan amendment bylaw number 4754, and second, third, and fourth and final readings to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4753.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, second by Councillor Towner. Councillor Hodge.
So, I got a question. It's more of a, at this point, procedural question. Tonight, a number of residents spoke about wanting to see more density in their neighborhood. And I sort of put circles on the map as they spoke. And there was certainly a number from Area C. There was residents who were concerned about Adjournment Avenue. There's some area there that's sort of almost like orphaned in the middle. And then we had two people that spoke about the area that's just down around Rochester on Clayton. And there were two residents there who brought up concerns. One about a high-rise that's sort of not, we're not suggesting it, I guess in future it can go to a higher density than what it is now. And we had one gentleman who spoke about this, the property across the street has higher density, but there's a proposed street that's going to go through, yet his property is going to have to pay for half the street without getting the lift and the density. So I identified those 4 spots as areas of concern, and I'm just wondering, with the process before us now, and a lot of work's gone into this, I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity to incorporate those changes? I mean, we have a public hearing to hear the public. That's what I heard. Without sending this all back, how do we make these adjustments if we feel that we want to do that?
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thanks, Worship. Not a simple answer, unfortunately. At this point, public hearing's closed. Council has a number of choices. You can support, pass the bylaw as it is. You can decline it. You can refer it back to staff. You can make some changes, but those changes are limited unless you're going to send it back through another public hearing. You can't change land use. You can't increase density without going back through the process again. So I think in most of those instances it would be an increase in density that was being requested or proposed. And so to do that, staff would need council's direction. We would need to go back and look at that. We'd probably then come back with a new report with a bylaw that would rescind first reading of the existing bylaw, lay out those changes or revisions to address those concerns, have the discussion with council, and that then would be forwarded back to a public hearing, so it would repeat the whole process. Another option might be, and there was a handful, there's a couple of sort of areas of concern or question. We can take that away. We've got another process we're getting started with in Southwest Coquitlam, the Housing Choices Project review, and that too will lead to an official community plan amendment bylaw. So there may be an opportunity to add these pieces here if there's specific attention given to these areas, and I think there's some merit to those. we could then piggyback that on this Housing Choices OCP Amendment Bylaw, which will allow us to get on with the BLMP now, and we'll add that to the other piece of work, and it may take a little bit longer, and because I think we'd want to make sure we have good consultation with those areas in question, and then we'd bring that whole package back to council later in the year.
So that would allow us to move forward with the bylaw, not have to go to public hearings, not start the whole thing again, but recognize that there was, in my view, pretty clear direction. Granted, it wasn't on the plan, so maybe there's some people that would or might be opposed to this. They might have come out and spoke. But tonight, we had a lot of people here, and I think maybe one person spoke against the plan, and everybody else was saying, yes, but it doesn't go far enough. I mean, there were some issues around pathways and things, and I think we need to address how we're going to deal with those. But I don't think that's sufficient enough for me to vote against the plan. But I really do have some concerns about some of these pockets that have only just come to light, at least in my view, for me tonight.
Again, Your Worship, through the chair, agreed. I think there's some of those areas can be singled out, and we can do some further work on that. I know there's some questions raised about road widenings and greenways and that, and I know in conferring with Andrew between the break, through the servicing assessment, which are prepared to go along with the neighborhood plans these days, I think maybe there's an opportunity to flesh that out a little bit, to give information and around that process. We've done that before, for example, Northeast plans around park dedications or park designations and that. So there may be an opportunity to work in some additional information in that way.
Yeah, my recollection was that even the couple of people that spoke, they didn't come right out and say it's a bad idea to put the greenway here. They were more concerned about the impact on them and the fairness of spreading the assets. So it was more a process procedure, as you say. So my view is I think we need to look at some maybe policy or procedure stuff. But I think from a land use standpoint, they're fine with the new roads and things. So that's not a deciding factor for me. So, okay, I feel better knowing that at least we have some options to deal with these four, and I'll listen to what everybody else has to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you. For Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood plan, it's 1,400 acres, and I think 2.5 years of work. And I think if you were to break it down and say, where are we on that 1,400 acres in terms of hitting the nail right on the head? You're 98% of the way there. There's a couple of pockets that we heard about tonight. So first off, congratulations to staff for all the work that you put into this. And Andrew, I know you've led the way with a lot of this, so congratulations and thank you for that. Much like Craig has just said, or Councillor Hodge has just said, I think we heard about Section C, and if there's an ability to address some of what we heard tonight with the neighborhood plan that would see us address the Section C comments we heard, I think that's important. And I think it's important as well that we send a message that Oakdale, we were saying, is a future study area, but every single piece of land use planning says when you've got rapid transit rate there, it should have the higher density attached to it. So I really want to send a strong message that while we're saying it's a future study, that's not necessarily a future study 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road. If applications are coming forward, let's take a look at them. If it makes sense to do it and the neighborhood is open to it, as we have heard tonight, there's certain pockets that are very much open to it, I want to see that we're open to having those discussions, recognizing that it's an added step from the developer's perspective to actually have to make that OCP amendment. That's okay. I can accept that for now, with the understanding that, this councillor especially is open to looking at that because it is proper land use, which is what we really should be focusing on. So the Section C, the Oakdale, and there was another section just south of the Christmas Banner and Clayton, in that area that we had a presentation a few weeks back to committee that we actually brought it into here because so many people showed up. That was another area where neighborhoods had got together and said, you know what, a higher densification through here, the low rise or the townhome makes sense. So again, I really want to see if we can address that, if it can be done through the neighborhood attached residential work that we're doing. I think that makes good sense, because again, those are land uses that make good sense given the transit that we do have in the area. So again, thanks to staff for that and for all the work you've done on it. And I will support moving this forward, because again, I think there's so much of it has nailed it that we need to move it along and then fill in the blanks as we go. Good work. Thank you.
Councillor Rasmussen.
Thank you. Well, it's been a long night, long public hearing, a lot of information to staff, tremendous amount of work. I think this is probably I think as Andrew pointed out, the most consultation we've ever done on any plan. And I think we've done the best job, I think, in trying to outreach. We, at times, had gone to staff and had them increase their outreach a couple of times. And we're not going to make everybody happy with this, but I think we've done the best job at getting out there and trying to get a consensus on this plan. I think this plan, the way it is right now, is the way to go forward. I know the Area C, the other areas, they want some amendments. These are not minor amendments. These are major amendments to this plan. And they would actually delay this plan probably into next year, because you would have to go back to a public hearing. You'd probably have to go back on some of these and do some more public consultation around some of these changes, even though you've done your work in your area. So I think the one option I think Mr. McIntyre, I was already aware of, is the housing choices, to piggyback on that one. Or you still have within this plan, and what we realized, and I think through the planning department and Andrew Merrill, was we have an amending formula built into the plan to allow for amendments. And I think both those processes, either the amending formula or going through the housing choices review, will be quicker than if we were not to pass this or send it back and have it go out. So I think those two areas are the best way to go. Secondly, I agree with what Councillor Morrison said, that Oakdale, in there, there's been pushback. Now there's some disagreement happening in Oakdale about wanting more density and everything. But they're right up close to a SkyTrain station. I look along Como Lake towards Burnaby on North Road there, moving in through there, that those are prime areas for densification in that area. But once again, I think that's a study area to go back in there. But I also think, once again, the amending formula is going to give us our ability to deal with that area. There will be some land assemblies in there. I think some of the people have already said that living within a 5-minute walk, there's going to be people that want to sell out. Land will be assembling, and people will be coming forward with higher density in that area. I think it's inevitable in that area, being that close to a SkyTrain station. It's kind of strange. You've got 3 corners of the plan there, all being more high density, and you got one corner saying no. So I don't want to stop this, because we've done 2.5 years worth of work, but I think the 2 areas that will help it, and I think the amending formula, and I do think, is what Councillor Mars said, that we're open to looking in those areas, and I think we all realize now there's issues with some of the owners in there. When it comes to parks and everything, people have to understand that we give fair market value. If the zoning's going to be townhousing surrounding it, we give you the land for townhousing. If it's high-rise, we do not say, okay, everything around you is townhousing, but you're still a single family. You only pay. No, we don't do that. We be fair. So we try to be fair in all our ways in dealing with the public. And I'm very thankful about all the people that came out here, because most of the people here tonight came out speaking about increased density. And increased density will, by putting more units there, help us with affordability across the board and having more people and families living in our neighborhood. So I'm very, very happy for the public that lives in those areas being acceptable of the increase in density in their areas, or bringing in young families and making it more affordable to keep those people in our area. So to those groups, Area C, the other people down low, thank you for all your work. Thank you for what you're doing. I think those 2 areas keep moving forward, and I think we'll see you back on those 2 tracks better than what we would, and moving this forward. And I just want to thank you for the tremendous amount of work and commitment that you guys have put into this. I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. I will be supporting the neighborhood plan moving forward, because I think we've been through an incredibly long process, and so many people have worked very hard on it. I know it's not perfect, and I'm sending a signal right now that suggests, from my perspective at least, that there are several Whiting Way, there's certainly the Oakdale stuff, and for that matter, Grant, I have no qualms whatsoever about contemplating the better densities, the higher densities in actually for each one of the persons that spoke tonight about. It's funny, you look down the list and almost everybody was calling for higher density. Higher density, put it in my front yard kind of perspectives, not NIMBY at all, but rather really, and part of it is certainly the self-interest, but also the reality that life has changed in the Lower Mainland, and we need to find ways of producing a different form of product. About the only thing we can do as councils is lower the land cost per door, lower the cost of dirt, the cost of land per unit, and that means density. Not much else that we can do. We can't, you can say you only need one elevator or whatever, but that's a very small component compared to the land component. And the land component is always about 1/3 of the housing cost. So we can achieve elements of affordability and elements of a better range of housing options by through density, and that's what this plan puts forward, is a marked change in West Coquitlam to embrace what I think is the beginning of a completely different market, a completely different world in the course of the development of Metro Vancouver. The drawing of a hard line around the development areas is a sea change from the perspective of now what do we do, now that we will no longer sprawl, now that we will always have to try and densify in order to accommodate the increased population that we're anticipating over the next 25 years. So I'm absolutely supportive of this. I think we have to move forward with this. At the same time, we have to contemplate those areas where I think we still have room to improve. And those, but I can't, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And that's what we would do if we accepted the last lines of so many of the speakers who suggested that we refer it back and let's try to tweak it some more. We can tweak it, but it won't be, from my perspective, it won't be before we pass the neighborhood plan. It will be in the months after we pass the neighborhood plan. I've got Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you very much. And my sentiments are very similar to the previous four speakers. But I'd like to put a sharper point on our direction to staff in response to what we heard tonight. First off, I have to characterize this evening as an extraordinary evening. How many times have we read in Metro Vancouver, especially the city of Vancouver, about opposition to increasing densities and things like this, and the NIMBY factor, and people are pulling their hair out, gnashing their teeth over this, and how do we persuade the citizens that this is the way that we have to go in the modern metropolis that we live in now. And here we saw a speaker after speaker after speaker coming out saying, bring it on. Yes, there's self-interest involved, but also it serves the community's interest, clearly. And this is when the stars kind of come together. So I want to be able to honor that, and I won't honor that by taking their main suggestion, which was to not pass this and to send it back to the drawing board, because I do think that will be a slower process than some of the things we're talking about. And let's go, especially the two areas in the northern part here, Oakdale, future planning area. I think it's clear the future is now. Who said that before? The future is now. We have to move on this now. So I don't know what the capacity of the planning department is.
Well, tonight they're tired.
Well, we're all a little tired, but I'm trying to get a little excitement going here, because let's not take this lightly. What happened here tonight? This is an extraordinary evening, and so I'd like to hear from staff what their original plan was for Oakdale future planning area. Did that mean, oh, we'll get around to it in 2 or 3 years, or because I think we need to say that we have to start on this right away. So first off, some staff reaction to that, Mr. Mayor, or can I go directly to staff on this one? Mr. Merrill?
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor O'Neill. In the plan right now, there are 3 triggers outlined for when that future planning in Oakdale might take place. The first one is that Council prioritizes the work item on our business plan and directs staff to undertake that planning process. The second is a significant number of residents in Oakdale come forward and submit a petition to Council asking, again, Council to direct staff to undertake that planning process. And the third would be we receive a development application that's proposing an OCP amendment in Oakdale, and then that would cause us to say, well, we shouldn't just do a spot OCP amendment in Oakdale. We really should look at the wider area and undertake that future planning process.
So thank you very much. That's a great answer, right to the point. So I think of those 3, we sort of have 2. We've got council sitting around the table tonight so far saying we really got to get the move on Oakdale. And we had an extraordinary number of citizens, and there were other people earlier who weren't here tonight that we've heard from in the part of Oakdale that I've heard from more close to Clark Road. So the people we heard from tonight are in the primarily in the southwest corner of Oakdale. So we've got 2 of those 3 triggers, I think, right now, right in front of us. I don't know if we need to actually have a formal council direction, but you've heard that council says they heard this and they want to move on it. And the citizens of Oakdale want to move on it. Is that enough?
We always run the risk when we listen to the people that have come to the public hearing, and they're the people who have something that they want to raise about an item. Those people that are supportive of an item typically don't show up at the public hearing unless they want something changed, an element changed. So we may not have heard from anybody tonight that is perfectly comfortable with where Oakdale is, and that might be because they're perfectly comfortable with where Oakdale is in this plan. So that said, my position on Oakdale hasn't changed. I still believe that we should be using planning principles and not placing as much of a weight on the perhaps ever-changing perspective of neighborhoods as they try to contemplate the future. But it is a good question.
Okay, so you have to remember the planning process, if it does get triggered tonight, is not a fait accompli leading us somewhere. If indeed we've seen or heard from just those people who wanted more and everybody else who didn't, and I know there are some people who don't want more, then that will come out in this future planning process. If the future is now, we'll find out sooner rather than later. And I think we need to find out sooner rather than later. Speaking to the good planning principles, which of course has primarily dealing with the proximity to SkyTrain. So I think the triggers are there for that. And I'll leave it at that for the time being. Now over to area, my little map. Over to the area across Clark Road,
Grant.
The Grant area, is that what it's called? Oh yeah, the Grant area, yes. So the sharper point that I want to put on the sentiment that's been shared by council that yes, we should listen to these citizens here is some sort of firmer wording that adding this to the neighborhood attached residential review, that this does get added with as a result of council interest in looking at increased density, council interest that was certainly reinforced by the residents who made presentations tonight. So I would want some clear language there that it's just not kind of captured in the minutes or something, like that when somehow, and I don't know the best way of doing it, we could have a resolution saying, yes, definitely in your NAR/housing choices, that this neighborhood is part of that, with an eye to responding to council concerns about increasing the density for those parts that now say they are being left out. So to get the staff's response to that, perhaps?
Yes, we can. I'm cognizant of the time, as well as the fact that the motion on the floor is the neighborhood plan. Where do we go from here is perhaps a discussion for a different time. But I'm perfectly willing to allow it to go forward if Mr. McIntyre has a good answer. I'm also cognizant of the time, and he may have already given his best answer.
It's my best shot, thank you. No, it's very, very clear to us. I think the numbers, this group was out tonight. They came with a well-prepared presentation before. Certainly, a motion just puts a really fine point out, but we take that as direction. And my response would be as well, because we are coming back with a proposed work program very, very soon around the Housing Choices Program. It's a report that we can refine to include those elements. So you'd see that within a week or two's time. And that would be, because that report is asking for council's endorsement of a scope and process for the housing choices. So we'll be layering this into that process report you'll see in a week or two's time.
That sounds quite reasonable to me. And just to absolutely clarify this, that this process, to my mind, would be infinitely more efficient and quicker to deal with the request that we got tonight than not voting in favor of this, neighborhood plan, sending it all back to start. That, to me, I know we started talking about this whole plan more than 3 years ago, but that to me would take much longer than the process you're proposing now. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. I would see a very focused, a very focused process, and to get through it in short order.
Excellent. I'm satisfied with that then. Those are the two main things that I wanted to bring up tonight, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Okay.
Thank you. I really like the idea of trying to roll this into the Housing Choices review. Is it? I just want to make sure it's feasible that we do the area C, that we do the area around Gilby, Clayton, as well as some of the other refinements that we heard about tonight. You figure that all of those can be accommodated in the review that you're doing?
Mr. McIntyre.
Your Worship, a number of neighborhood pockets were identified tonight through the speakers, various speakers. So what we would do is our commitment is to come back through that Housing Choices scope and process report and lay those out, and what we'd be recommending, and then for council's consideration. Do you agree that covers all the bases, or are there more? My only caution there would be if it's more and more and more, now you're really loading on into the process, and it does become less focused, sort of a quick hit and get it done. It becomes sort of neighborhood plan 2. So that would be the only balance. But you'd see it in that scope and process report.
That's great. And we talk about how sort of monumental the discussion was tonight, and how most people that came out were in favor of higher density. But I think we got to compare apples to apples, and I think often when we hear about NIMBYism, it's a group of residents opposing a specific project. And I think what we had with this plan is it's a whole plan. We're in the area of land assemblies where people are being offered, twice the value of their house. I think we got to keep it in that context. There was a lot of self-interest tonight, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's what NIMBY is as well. But I think it's a different paradigm that we were looking at tonight compared to most public hearings. But I thought it was great. I was very happy that people came out. I couldn't believe the numbers. They're well organized, well spoken, and sure gave a clear message. So that was great.
Thank you. Councillor Zerillo.
Thank you. Congratulations, Mr. Merrill. Not too much weight till you got your program undergoing here. Anyway, I wanted to talk about the press release that will probably come out with this if this gets passed today and the messaging. So I saw Ms. Vincent there, so that's wonderful. I'm wondering if the press release, maybe it's already planned, but could have some language around educating folks about what this means to them if they live in that area. I know there has been some heavy soliciting by real estate agents, land developers in that area, and there is some misunderstanding already, especially among seniors, that they have to sell. And I just was wondering if there is already planned to, or if we can add some education for folks about what a neighborhood plan acceptance like this would mean to them in regards to whether they have to move or not. Ms. Vincent, maybe?
Mr. Merrill.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Zerillo, the information bulletin has not yet been written, so there is still an opportunity to work with corporate communications on some of that messaging. Certainly, every time we have an opportunity to communicate with the public who are concerned about what are their property rights going forward from a property like this, we remind them, of course, that as the property owner, they maintain all their full rights, and it's up to them whether they choose to sell their property or not, or enter into a negotiation with a potential purchaser. And we can continue to clarify and refine those messages going forward.
Yeah, I thank you. I think it's important. And then the other thing, and I make note of, is that what options do we have just to reach out to real estate agents to ask them to practice balance when they're soliciting residents? I hear regularly about residents that are being door knocked incessantly about buying their homes. I'm just wondering, is there a channel for us to just remind real estate agents that this is their private property and that they have a right to privacy, and they want to mail stuff that's very different than knocking on their door every couple of weeks?
Through Mayor Stewart to Councillor Zerillo, as we've done in the past, we certainly can contact the real estate board to remind them that their members should be practicing good ethics as they undertake their profession. And I think the city has done that in the past through different letters for different issues that have cropped up in the real estate industry locally.
Personally, I think that would be wonderful to just have another reminder if this goes through. Just, for them to exercise balance and, as you said, practice as they've signed on to. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. And Councillor Towner.
Thank you, and I'm very cognizant of the time. I just want to say, it wouldn't be a public hearing from me without me giving sincere kudos to you, Mr. Merrill, for sure. I just want to say, the community elects us to set overall direction and policy. And in order to do that, we need advice from the professionals and from the public. We need to listen. And I really strongly feel that this has been done in this case here. The amount of work, analysis, consultation, and revision that's gone into this has just been remarkable. I make note of in the preamble that there was over 93 interactions with the public. Over 5,000 direct interactions with the public. I attended some of the open houses. They were very well attended and just well done. I mean, it enabled the public to really get educated and put together things like this and really learn. And we learned a lot tonight hearing some of these little pockets that need a little more attention. So I'm totally in favor of moving this forward. And someone said it's 98%. You would never fail an essay or a term paper in university if it was 98%. So 98% is outstanding. But I'm really glad that the public came out tonight. It was outstanding public engagement, telling us what they had concerns about. And if we can, I'm just going to say as well, if we can add that to the other analysis you folks are working on with the, what was it, the neighborhood attached residential, the housing choices. If that works, I think let's move ahead with this, but have further discussions on those areas. I also just want to say there was only one speaker tonight, but I really feel strongly about it, so I want to address it, who he wanted us to do a moratorium on, not demolishing purpose-built rentals. Well, that would be unethical of us. We have end-of-life, unsafe, no longer at code buildings in our city that we can replace with rental. And we just recently approved a project where we're demolishing 100 rentals, but we're creating 200. So if you do a moratorium on no more demolishing rentals, then we can't build more, make a better land use and use the land better and get more rental into our community, which increases supply, which will hopefully stabilize rental prices or bring it down even. So that's the only thing that I really wanted to speak to from the public tonight. So anyways, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing what more come forward with respect to those other sub-areas.
Okay, I think staff have some direction, generally speaking, on what we hope will happen next. I want to understand a little bit more, perhaps, what staff took away from the Oakdale side of things. What is the process moving forward on the Oakdale? I heard the NAR review on other components, but Oakdale specifically. Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. That's an area I would caution. We heard from a few people there tonight. We've heard from many throughout the process, both interested in seeing some change and not. Obviously, it's right in the shadow of the Guideway, the SkyTrain station. Something's going to happen, and I do agree its future's not too far off, but I would caution throwing that into the pot with the sub-area C and some of the other neighborhood pockets at this point in this process right now. We'll certainly keep an eye on it as we go through the process of setting up our 2018 work program, with council's direction that could be considered then. But I think if we want to get in and get these other areas done and quickly, I would not burden that with Oakdale, would be my advice.
Thank you. I did ask the question on behalf of a council member who was wondering where we ended up there. And it's clear that what you said was clear. And I will call the question. And I'm sure we haven't heard the last of Oakdale, but I will call the question on this motion. All in favor? Yeah. Motion is the staff recommendations for us. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Congratulations to staff. So start working on the other stuff.
Now I got nothing to do. No resting on your laurels.
Mr. Clerk.
Next item, item 7, pertains to 1358 Coast Meridian Road project. It's a proponent recommendation. Staff recommendations: Council authorize staff to prepare a memorandum of understanding with Habitat for Humanity for Council's consideration for the development and ongoing maintenance of an affordable housing project at 1358 Coast Meridian Road.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Hodge. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Next item.
That's how you do it, Andrew.
Yes.
Council's at liberty, and I know we're moving on, but just to recognize that Dennis Coots, the CEO of Habitat for Humanity, is here, and he has been here since we started this evening. So just to recognize him for attending this evening, I'd like to
Mr. Irvin, did you have something you wanted to say?
Time to go home, sir.
Well, on behalf of council, I want to thank you, first of all, for your patience and your participation tonight, but also your organization for the work you've done around the world. But we look forward to seeing what you can do here in Coquitlam. Thank you. This has been a night. So there we go. Well done, Mr. Irvin.
It's been a night and a morning. Item 8 pertains to single-family development frontage works and cash payment alternative for future construction. This is the program development phase, and it pertains to Building Amendment Bylaw number 4751, Subdivision and Development Servicing Amendment Bylaw number 4752. The agenda notes introductory comments by the General Manager of Planning and Development, but we skipped those last time and things went quickly, so I'm going to read the staff recommendation instead and let Mr. McIntyre speak afterwards. Staff recommendation is that Council establish off-site frontage works related to single-family dwelling building permits within the Southwest Coquitlam Area Plan as defined within the official community plan. 2, establish a cash payment alternative for single-family dwelling building permit applications when agreed to by both the applicant and the city. Endorse the actions proposed in the report before you regarding the implementation of the single-family development frontage works program and cash payment alternative for the future construction of such works. 4, give first, second, and third readings to City of Coquitlam Building Amendment Bylaw number 4751. I'll add the language as amended. As has been previously communicated, the bylaw has, I'll say, a typo. It refers to the zoning bylaw when in fact it's the building bylaw. 5, give first, second, and third readings to City of Coquitlam Subdivision and Development Servicing Amendment Bylaw number 4752. And finally, instruct staff to undertake further public notification of the proposed program prior to council consideration of fourth reading, should council grant first, second, and third readings to these bylaws.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, second by Councillor Marsden. All in favor, opposed, carried. Sorry, Councillor Cirillo.
No, it's passed already.
I just had a question about substantial renovation or additions. Is that covered in this? So if somebody adds, let's say, 400 square feet or 85% reno, do they also have to do the street frontage?
It's in the report. I'm just trying to find. Mr. Fuji will find it. There we go. Faster than us.
Through the chair to Councillor Cirillo. Generally speaking, things like additions, fire damage, repairs, and rentals to SFDs, to single-family dwellings, they would be exempt from the frontage works. However, if there's a situation where, for whatever reason, someone wants to come in and do a renovation to an existing single-family dwelling, where 25% or less of the original structure above foundation remains, or 75% or more of the reconstructed home is new, they would then, the proposed program would apply to them.
That's on the top of page 5.
I see it.
Yep.
I'm just concerned about that. Okay, the other thing is the range of 30,000. Is there going to be some sort of increase over time? I mean, how are we going to accommodate how expensive it is to get things done even in 5 years from now?
Through the chair, yes, those numbers would be evaluated on an annual basis by city engineering staff. So as in conjunction with all of our capital works program and all of our construction programs, those numbers would also be evaluated on a yearly basis.
Okay, thanks. So then do we publish that? Like, I guess, would that be published on the city website every year? There's an update of what the frontage works would cost. I'm only asking because I know that these are the sort of things that people consider when they decide whether they're going to subdivide or additions or build big houses.
Yeah, through the chair, the numbers themselves, we don't expect would be physically accessed through this website, but there would be an information area where they can then contact staff, they can review the circumstances of their property. There's a number of variables that would go on with regards to the extent of works that may have already been completed within the frontage, and so there's a number of variables. So we would, the expectation is there would be a section that within our city website that would speak to this program and have the ability for them to contact staff to evaluate their specific property.
Okay. Well, the reason I'm asking is I am concerned that if we're collecting cash, that by the time it's time to do the works, that we're not going to have enough cash. So that's where my questions came from. I'm just worried that I'd much rather people just did it at the time of build, but can't always have that, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the renovation the component is an unusually high bar to have a renovation kick in. There's other types of requirements where a lower renovation would have triggered whatever it is that it triggers. In this case, I can't even fathom a project where they would try to save 20% of the house and make it a renovation rather than knock down the remaining 20 and start over. So it's a strange bar. Okay. Question is the 6 recommendations. All in favor? All opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Move to adjournment.
Second.
Councillor Asmundson moves to adjourn, seconded by Councillor Towner and others. All in favor of adjournment? Opposed? Carried unanimously. I do want to acknowledge that this coming Saturday is one of our biggest celebrations of the year. Of course, we will be celebrating not only Canada Day, but Canada's 150th birthday. And there's a great team of both city and volunteers and others that are participating and getting ready for what will be an epic party on Saturday. So come one, come all to our Canada Day celebrations. Thank you all. Eid Mubarak. Good night. Oh, sorry, question period. I will now open the floor to any questions from anyone who has a death wish that wants to ask a question on any item from tonight's agenda. Sorry, I meant anyone at all. I didn't mean the death wish part. Okay, anyone at all? Anyone at all? Thank you all for coming.